Hi, my name is James Andriella, and you are listening to the Back to Human podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Sally Norton. Sally has a nutrition degree from Cornell University, along with a master's degree in public health. She is also the author of the book Toxic Superfoods: How Oxalate Overload is Making You Sick and How to Get Better, which will be the topic of conversation today. And it's been well over a year now since I decided to give up vegetables. I can't honestly say that it was for any reason in particular other than wanting to lighten the burden in the kitchen after Jade had our son. She was the one that would be responsible for cooking any sides, and I really did not want any more prep time in the kitchen. So this was my sort of solution. And after a few weeks, I noticed that I didn't really feel like I was missing anything. If anything, I felt better and
Hmm.
as if I had more energy. And Jade noticed that she also wasn't getting bloated or she wasn't feeling heavy after meals anymore. So we stuck with it, and decided to do a little bit more research when I came across Sally's book, Toxic Superfoods. And one thing that stuck out to me in particular in Sally's book was that she mentioned that her eating healthy was actually making her sick, or making some of her symptoms that she was experiencing worse, which is alarming to me as a health coach because people may begin a health journey trying to eat healthy, thinking that they're doing the right thing and they expect to feel better. Meanwhile, they are potentially doing their body harm by consuming quote unquote health foods. And it can then be very difficult to make the connection that the healthy foods that they're eating are actually what is behind their symptoms. So, with this episode, I hope that we can shed some light on some of these toxic foods and learn from hearing Sally's story. Without further ado, Sally, welcome to the show.
What a pleasure to be with you. It's really going to be fun. Yeah, all the things you're just saying there, seems so wrong to try hard to eat healthy and get punished for it. To me, ooh, that's not fair.
So, we were getting into it before the intro. It's like, how did you come across oxalates being toxins and how do they ruin your life? How was it showing up for you?
Yeah, I went to Cornell for a nutrition degree because I wanted to help people not get sick. I wanted to be in a health promotion space. And that decision was from like 1976. So I've been around a while and I've worked in integrated medicine. I've worked at universities. I've written research grants and just been around the space of holistic health and healing for a very long time. And I knew since college that oxalates are a big component in kidney stones, and anyone with kidney problems of any kind, particularly kidney stones, should be on a low oxalate diet. So I just thought, like, no spinach for the kidney people. And I didn't know. What later became the biggest revelation in all of my career working in integrative health, working in academia, being a nutrition geek since literally kindergarten. It was in seventh grade. I'm like, okay, nutrition is the answer to help people not get sick. Oh my gosh. It turns out that that little kidney toxin is a toxin to the rest of the body too. And you can literally create a toxicity disorder from a chemical that naturally occurs in food, that nature puts in foods that we trust. And it's bad enough that it's bad for kidney patients, and their doctors don't even tell them or test their urine and say, hey, your kidney stones are made of oxalate. No, they would say you have calcium stones, and they forget to tell you, oh, by the way, oxalate is coming from your diet. And that's partially because they've been miseducated. They think that it's not so much diet as it is metabolic. And so there's this fantasy that it's a special thing that needs medication versus there's a lifestyle answer to this. All toxicity has to have a prevention answer. There's no good post toxin answer for any toxin, whether it's mercury, lead, cadmium, aluminum, oxalates, trans fats. It's much better to not poison yourself, your pregnancy, threaten your fertility and your reproductive health and your children's well being and your aging to ignorance and being cavalier about toxins because they happen to be hiding in foods we think are healthy for us, which is this stuff that's on the cover of my book: the spinach, the chard, beet greens, beets, sweet potatoes, nuts, star fruit, kiwi, figs. It's like these things are supposed to be so great for us are containing enough of this toxin because toxicity is about dose, you can have little traces of toxins and do okay. But you start messing around with this handful of foods that are high in oxalate, and you can slowly, gradually build up, silently even, without even knowing it, build up a toxicity. And the body's pretty good at defending itself, and you're busy eating all these vegetables, and then you do something radical, radically experimental, like being willing to jump outside your culture and just quit eating some of these foods that you were told are so good for you that you need them. Like they're going to help you heal or be superhuman or age well. And you quit them and you actually feel better. What do you trust? The mythology of the culture or your body? You have to pick. Most people are gonna pick mythology and groupthink. They're not gonna respect their own body's feedback that quickly.
Yeah, I have a book. It's called Going Somewhere, I believe, and it talks about how like science can kind of be manipulated, and whoever holds the gold makes the rules. So who is funding some of these studies? And I personally like to go based off of anecdotal evidence. So like you're saying, I noticed that I felt much better without these things, and it's not that I didn't like them. I can't say I ever liked the salad. That was never really appetizing to me, but things like broccoli, asparagus, sweet potatoes, I know that was one of your crutches. But I liked these foods. I didn't really have a problem with them, but I was under the impression that they are healthy, and go figure. It's kind of funny how the world works. I had to stop at this place called Raw Juice today where they make like smoothie bowls and such, juices. And then just prior to getting on this call with you, I was in one of my clients' gardens and I'm looking at their vegetable garden and everything looks amazing. But in the back of my head, I'm like, I'm gonna have to tell him about this. I'm gonna have to share this episode with him. And I know that you were, I believe, an avid gardener as well from reading your book. So I know that changed for you. And at the smoothie bar, they serve pretty much everything that you were mentioning. So they got the veggies, they have the almond milk, which is like the base for a lot of their bowls, the acai bowls. And this just has to be a complete oxalate bomb.
They have
I
quinoa
see the
in them?
people. No, this is more just like fruits. They don't have like any of the
Not like
grains
the
or anything.
chia seeds and the quinoa and the those are also
Mhm.
a big issue.
Yeah, and I personally did not order anything from here, just picking something up for my client, but I see people walking in the door, I'm like, "You have no idea what this potentially may be doing to you." And I almost need to, like, make a new shirt, like Paul Saladino does. It's "Kale is BS," something along those lines, and share the message.
That's great that
You
you're out
say
there carrying a message that's controversial.
Yeah, it's
Hide in groupthink and not be willing to speak the truth, which is,
mhm.
you know, controversial.
You gotta be brave to do so.
But once it's ruined your life, it's like no one no one's mythology is going to hurt your own confidence in
Mhm,
knowing what you know.
mhm,
And hopefully people if we could get a little light into the topic or into the conversation, maybe there's a any beany possibility that some of what we're being taught isn't quite right and there's room for correction. And those are the people we can help who see, okay, yeah, everyone's kind of sick. They're on pain medications. The kids are on are having trouble behaving. There's a huge problem with drug overdosing because people are either, they have physical pain or they have emotional pain, and they're using either street drugs or prescription drugs to manage that. And we have a big problem there. We have a lot of people being prescribed medications early in life and then stacking medications. We have health system that's overburdened with needy patients that have a hard time getting appointments because the doctors are so busy. So there's things we're not doing right because the population is struggling. And if we could recognize that, there's room for better information, better behavior, something, some improvement. And some people are picking up on a good idea that's helping.
mhm. What were you personally experiencing? Because I read through the book And I know that at one point you were waking up, I believe, like 26 times an hour. So you mentioned how it affects not just the kidney system, which is what I guess the medical literature hyper focuses on, but it's every single system, including reproductive systems as well. What were you personally
Nervous
experiencing?
system. Yeah. Well, in retrospect, you can start to see later, earlier and earlier in your life, it goes way back. And for those of us who it goes way back for, by the time you're middle aged, you're a train wreck. And so had to leave my job. I was bleeding to death with fibroids, tiny little ones. The doctor like, oh, those aren't big enough to be causing all that. But I needed iron infusions. I was losing blood like somebody who was about to be roasted on a spit. And that was not good. And my back was killing me. And I had this total hysterectomy. They got in there and they found endometriosis, which was undiagnosed. For a third of women, endometriosis is deadly painful. But for some of us, there's no symptoms at all. Scarring on the colon from that, loose blood in there. The ovaries were a mess. You're like, this all has to come out. And we're having this conversation during surgery because I was on epidural. Okay, so this health nut, her insides are a mess. And then after that surgery, I just couldn't get off the couch. I couldn't read, I couldn't function. And it had already been a problem. When I was working, it took everything I had to do this brain work of writing research grant budgets and managing projects and doing writing and submitting research proposals to NIH. And the work we're doing is heavy brain work all day long. It took everything because the brain energy was pretty flat. Well, later on, as my endocrinologist post, ovaries is trying to figure out what's wrong with her, her tests look great. She looks fine. She looks better than everyone her age. Her tests look fine. She feels like garbage. She can't read. She can't get off the couch. She has no energy. Her brain doesn't work. So he sends me to the sleep lab, and sure enough, 29 times and more than 26, 29 times an hour, the brain is waking up. So, like, every minute, it gives like a minute of rest, 2 minutes of rest. The brain is hyper aroused and can't stay settled down. And this neuroinflammation or the neuro damage causes this hyper engagement of the nervous system. And that can create all kinds of issues. So this is a neurotoxicity. It makes sense. Oxalic acid could be involved in neurotoxicity for sure. We see it all over the literature with ethylene glycol poisoning in particular. And that sounds like a totally random topic because what's ethylene glycol and what does it have anything to do with spinach? Well, that is because ethylene glycol, which is the main ingredient in antifreeze, gets processed by the liver and turns into oxalate. And people use antifreeze to commit suicide or murder. You can slip it in somebody's drinks, their wine, their food, because it's sweet. It doesn't taste bitter or nasty. You can hide it with the flavor food. You can slowly try to kill your husband so you can marry your lover. This happens even in professors, like UNC, there's a case of this. There's a case online of a woman on their 5th or 7th wedding anniversary trying to kill her husband with the dinner she made.
Mm, Jesus.
With the ethylene glycol. So ethylene glycol, a few days later, there's so much oxalate building up the body because your liver makes oxalate out of ethylene glycol. Small amounts of oxalate is not all the ethylene glycol goes straight to oxalic acid. A small percentage of it. It doesn't take that much forming in the tissues to start being a problem. And those patients who are poisoned but not dead, like they didn't take quite enough fast enough to die, they end up with Bell's palsy, unable to speak or talk. The cranial nerves get all messed up. They end up with tinnitus and eye problems and issues. And some of those, and neuropathy is known, very known with oxalates, where you get other forms of nerve damage. And so you get this oxalic acid that becomes oxalates, that the parent compound is oxalic acid. This stuff has a charge on it. It likes to grab minerals. Well, think electrolytes, think calcium, potassium, magnesium, iron. Well, the way that cells work is they have membranes, and on membranes is where all the action's at in life. So they're embedded in membranes of cells and cell organelles. So inside a cell, there's little compartments, and they are all membrane structures that contain each compartment. Those are called, subcellular suborganelles. Those membranes have proteins in them, and those proteins do the enzymatic work and the transporting work of moving things around, controlling the cell, making things, making hormones, and all the stuff the cell, the work, the machinery of life is all happening on a membrane. That membrane needs a polarity most of the time, especially with nerves. You control a polarity, you run electrical charges down an axon and you transfer energy and information, and nerves are helping to control muscles and mood and thinking and you name it, does all kinds of stuff. You got to have control over that polarity. The polarity is like a battery. Battery has a plus side and a negative side. That's polarity. So you need ions, more pluses and more negatives on each side of the membrane, and you need to control them and move them around in such a way where you get this special charges, right? You're running a charge down an axon. So you're turning on a battery on and off, polarity, you're depolarizing and polarizing. You need very careful control of your little charged molecules. The key charged molecule in cells that helps to run this whole story, control the whole thing, send information, make stuff happen, is a little metal ion called calcium. And of course, there's potassium and sodium and all these important electrolytes in there, all part of the charged battery that helps cells do the work they do to function. And this is especially important with the mitochondria, which is a double folded, double molecule. All membranes is a double, but the mitochondria has two layers of membrane. So all of this chattering is to say that charged particles, these electrolytes, these minerals, the cells need to maintain control over them. If you get too much oxalic acid in there, which likes to grab them, you are mucking things up right down there in the basic process of life itself, how a cell stays alive and does what it has to do. If you start messing up the electrolytes by taking calcium and pulling calcium in places and following calcium around and then turning it into little crystals. Remember I said oxalate becomes kidney stones? That's because oxalic acid, which is in your foods, moves into your body, starts grabbing calcium out of your tissues, your blood, and your bones, and so on, and starts forming little crystals. And they happen later. That can form while you're forming urine in the kidneys. For some reason, science thinks that only happens when you're in the kidneys. But actually, it's causing problems in the digestive tract. It's going from your digestive tract into the bloodstream, where it's affecting the white blood cells that are in the blood, the red blood cells that are in the blood, the endothelial lining of the vascular system. Those is a very important regulatory tissue of knowingness. There's a lot of sensing and knowledge and regulatory control happening with the lining of your vascular system. That is your arteries and your veins and your capillaries. And that's what's delivering those nice immune cells and red blood cells with oxygen and all the nutrients and the calcium and the other nutrients. And it goes from your stomach, oxalate's in there mucking around with those important tissues, going straight to the liver. Now, the liver can't do anything to get rid of the oxalate. People think, oh, you metabolize. No, you don't metabolize oxalate. You don't have an enzyme in the liver to do anything about oxalate. In fact, the liver makes more oxalate. So the liver adds, goes from your food to your liver right away. And then the liver makes it higher because it makes a little bit like 12 milligrams a day. And so what does the liver do? It has to defend its tissues, its cells from that spinach smoothie, Aussie bowls, high oxalate meals that are so popular right now. And what does it do? It uses its glutathione. So the cells make glutathione to try to control the oxidative stress, the damage from all this messing with the electrolytes and the other things that it's doing that creates stress, that adds inflammation. The liver makes glutathione to correct all that. Well, you use up enough of your glutathione and you're going to have trouble with all the other toxins. It's a stressful thing to keep flooding a liver after each meal, which is possible if you like whole wheat toast with peanut butter on for breakfast or a spinach smoothie for breakfast, and then you go out for like a Subway sandwich or something with spinach on it, or get French fries for lunch, and then you have a sweet potato for dinner and some chocolate somewhere in between. You're eating oxalate every single meal, and so the liver keeps getting wave after wave after wave. And then that blood that leaves the liver is full of more oxalate, and it goes just up a little bit to the next organ, that's the heart. So one side of the heart takes that blood full of nutrients, sends it to the lungs for more oxygen, comes back from the lungs with more oxygen, still got all that oxalate in it, except for what accidentally got stuck in the liver, gallbladder, vascular system, heart muscle, lungs, heart. Now it's going to go out to peripheral circulation and go all over the place and get attracted to areas that have calcium. So it's attracted to your jaw, your sinuses, your teeth, your skull, your shoulder joint, like your skeleton, right? It's attracted to, gets stuck around areas where there's inflammation, infection. Regenerating cells are sticky. So the oxalate tends to precipitate out when there's extra cell debris. So if you wore out something today, or if a cell died and there's little vacuoles around, oxalic acid, now carrying some calcium potentially, gets in a set of pairs and it becomes a crystal. And that crystal is real toxic and tends to stick to tissues that are in these states of reproduction, recovery, or they're in inflamed state because they're infected or have other reasons for inflammation. So it gets kind of starts hanging around tissues because it's coming in every meal. And eventually the kidneys filter it out and you pee out the oxalic acid. And science has been assuming that you pee it all out because the research is hard to do and it looks like it's all coming out. And yet it really isn't, because there's science is very well clear as well that it's not all coming out.
So you're mentioning calcium a lot. And so would this be like how certain joints and such become like overcalcified?
Oh, this is so interesting because you get calcium oxalate crystals forming in the synovial fluids in joint spaces. And you get calcium hanging around in breast tissues of the oxalate and so on. But often what's happening with other forms of calcification, because not all calcification in the body is calcium oxalate. It's apatite, it's other things, and you get other kinds of crystals forming like uric acid crystals. It turns out that oxalate is the kind of fundamental first crystallization that can create uric acid crystallization and create apatite crystallization. So we have this technical term for bone calcium we call calcium apatite. And that calcification is done by cells. Like that's how you make teeth and jaws and keep your bones, is you have this ability to create calcifications, ossified. You make them with bone cells. Well, why can the bone cells do that and other cells can't? Because they're genetically been tagged as a bone cell and they have to act like a bone cell, and other cells better not act like a bone cell. And they can do that because somebody flags which recipes in the book, the recipe book of your DNA. All the cells carry the whole recipe book, the entire genome. And some cells are busy being lips, and other cells are busy being skin, and other cells are being bones or tendons. But if you mess up the cell, oxalate does this, the crystals especially, but oxalate itself, oxalic acid, can mess up a cell enough where now the cell is starting to think it's a bone cell. So you get calcifications secondary to oxalate crystals and in just oxalic acid exposure. They've demonstrated this in breast tissue, for example. There's a couple of studies, just a few, that's not considered much, but it's very fascinating, that shows that the monocytes, these certain kinds of white blood cells, come to get those crystals that formed in the breast tissue, which is pretty common in mammography. They say about 14% of the mammographies show little oxalate crystals in there. And those crystals aren't supposed to be there. And so when they get a chance, the monocytes will come by and they'll try to eat them and break them down. And they produce some cytokines. This is inflammation chemicals that can damage the normal cells nearby. And the normal cells go through a transition and they can become bone cells and cancer cells. So the breast starts making calcifications without oxalate because it's trying to get rid of the oxalate. And so when you finally get the breast cancer, you see no oxalate, you see the bone cancer, you see the bone calcium with the cancer cells, and you no longer see the oxalate that started the problem. So the oxalate crystal started a problem that later led to calcified breasts and led to cancer. And guess who's not getting blamed? Guess who's totally innocent in the process
Yeah.
is the guy who started it. It just reminds you of a brawl with a bunch of 10-year-olds. Like, the kid who really started the problem went home scot-free, all the other kids got grounded.
Mhm. Mhm. It's a good example. That's I mean, this is mind-blowing right now. I never made that connection. I've done, like, research into, like, iodine and, fibrotic breast tissue, but this this is, like, scary. This is kinda scary stuff actually getting to talk about it and not just read it because people are gonna listen to this, and these are they're consuming seemingly, like, benign foods. The whole wheat toast, the avocado toast, that's a nice little superfood breakfast that people eat, but my heart's racing just hearing this type of stuff.
Yeah, because you really you once you start to understand the pathology, the protective instinct is like it is mind-blowing, and you can the interesting thing is you have to in order to find this, it's so hard to find this in the medical literature. No one's paying attention to it, it's hidden in all these different places, and in science itself, when they come up with these amazing results, like 80% of everybody has oxalate crystals in their thyroid gland. Like, nobody's studying it. Like, they say it's happening. If you know, 4 or 5 studies say, "Oh, there's oxalate in the thyroid gland." But is there an NIH department going, "Let's study oxalates in the thyroid gland?" No. So there isn't attention to it, but if you actually dig deep, it took me years to do the digging deep, you can see that in cases where there's a genetic problem where the liver you know how the liver makes a little oxalate? Well, there's a very, very, very rare disease called primary hyperoxaluria. What that means is your genetic expression is creating hyper high oxalate urea urine. So you got high oxalate in your urine, which is a funny way to define this disease because what you have is high oxalate in your body. And if your kidneys work, it shows up in the urine. But once your kidneys are broken from it, it's not going to show up in the urine anymore. So you still have this high oxalate problem, but it's not in the urine. So hyperoxaluria is how we define this disease because that's the one tissue you can measure the oxalates in. Very difficult to find it in the blood, very difficult to poke around and find little invisible crystals in your thyroid. It's just hard to find it. So that's the convenient way is think of it as the in the urine. Now, in these cases of primary hyperoxaluria, these usually it's diagnosed in childhood, sometimes within the first 6 months of birth. And the earlier you're diagnosed, the more quickly you're likely to die from it. So if you're diagnosed at 6 months, you won't see 18 months old in the past. Now they have a new drug out that helps a good percentage of these people that's brand new in the last couple years. But it's pretty much a death sentence because oxalate's poisonous. And some people don't get this disease till they're like 50. They had a car wreck, something kind of breaks their system can't handle it, and all of a sudden oxalate's all over the place, and they're sick with this genetic disease that could probably shorten their life by a tremendous amount. So what we see is great variability. Of the people who have the same genetic disease, they can come down with symptoms at any point in life, and it can show up completely differently in each person. Sometimes the only symptom they have is neck pain. But it's so some of these children, they have photos in these research studies showing calcified fascia all through the thighs of a baby. Like, it doesn't have oxalate in it, but they know it's because they have primary hyperoxaluria. They know it's because there's too much oxalate in the body that the fascia become calcified with hydroxyapatite calcium.
Mm,
So when we see oxalate being released from the body, which you can do if you change your diet, you can start to undo this body burden that's been building up over a lifetime of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and whole wheat toast and chocolate desserts and chocolate and peanuts and almonds all together and potatoes like galore, french fries, potato chips, curly fries, tater tots, you name it. This stuff, it's so normalized that most of us are a little bit toxic with oxalates, and some of us are a whole lot a bit toxic with oxalates. And you can undo this. It's a little tricky because it's the process of undoing. Remember, we're undoing the crystal from the breast. We create breast cancer. Like that process is pretty hard for the immune system to come eat crystals that are collecting in your thyroid gland and your bones and bone marrow shoulder joint, wherever it is, that's a difficult breast. It's just a difficult process to go through. So you don't really want to have to reverse it, but mostly that's where we're at now because a lot of us are even born with too much oxalate in our system. So removing that oxalate, we'll see crystals coming out of the body. You can see cloudy urine. You can feel crystals in the stool. Some people have crystals coming out of their skin, crystally gunk out of their eyes, tartar on the teeth. Like there's some evidence of this crystalline stuff. And some of it that's coming out isn't even all pure oxalate. Some of it is that hydroxyapatite calcium. So at some point, it helps the body also recover from the fibrosis and the calcifications and the collateral damage that goes along with the chronic overexposure to the oxalic acid in the foods we're eating.
So what you're mentioning there, it sounds like the oxalate dumping, which I read in the book, and something that I personally experienced when I did remove it. So I was good for a little bit, but then I started to get some really, really bad knee pain in
Mm.
my knee that I had previously torn and had ACL surgery with.
Yep.
So I asked a friend that is a carnivore. I've had him on the podcast as well. And I asked him, is this oxalate dumping that I'm personally experiencing right now? Because it hurts. However, you also mentioned uric acid as well, which is a precursor to gout, I believe. And it almost seemed like I had gout-like symptoms too.
Same thing. You can have gout from any crystal. Gout is a generalized inflammatory reaction, usually to crystals, and there's 5 or 6 crystals that do that. Oxalate and uric acid are the key ones. Yep. So there's no difference between an oxalate gout and a uric acid gout, except that in medicine we have a drug for uric acid gout, and we don't for the others. So we only call the uric acid as gout, but scientifically, those weird, painful, gouty inflammations can happen. And oxalate's probably a more common reason to have it.
And that could be attributed potentially to myself oxalate dumping, where I'm literally experiencing gout-like swollen, hot knee pain symptoms.
100% classic response. And for some of us, it'll be in the hip for 6 months and I'll be in low back for the next 6 months and like it'll move around. And if it's real intense, it really attention grabbing, that's very much this oxalate deaccumulation or oxalate poisoning coming in or going out. Going out is more stressful than going in because of those having to eat the crystal process and it really have to use the immune system for difficult work. Going in, the immune system's busy trying to help you not have symptoms. On the way out, it can't help it, but it's kinda like surgery with no anesthetic, right?
Mm, yeah. So, I mean, in my experience, things got way worse before they got better. There was a day when I could barely walk, honestly. I was hobbling in my car.
Some people need, like, 5 to 8 days when they're going through these cycles because their foot or their knee or their hip is so disabled.
It
Yeah,
was bad. Very, very bad.
it's hey, we're not saying this to scare anybody. This is just
Mm-mm.
speaking what's happening. This is just describing what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. For full disclosure, I am much, much better now, and I like sharing these stories because, in my opinion, that's what I want to hear. I want to hear the anecdotal stuff. What have people been through? What has worked for them? What's been successful? And not everything is always going to be pretty. So, when the symptoms have resolved, except I will say, if I introduce pretty much like any fruit now. So I've been, like, on a keto-ish approach for years now, but my main go-to would have been blueberries, and I measured it out. I was under 20 grams a day, literally just had, like, half a cup of blueberries, but anytime that I introduced the blueberries again, boom, gout flare-up, my knee is swollen, I can barely move.
Interesting. Interesting, because blueberries aren't even that high in oxalate, and a half cup of blueberries shouldn't be a
So
big oxalate hit. So all of this is so fascinating because the immune system gets revved up by different plant chemicals, including fiber. And I think once you get away from these foods, it gives the body a chance to tell you, hey, I'm really not loving this food. And it Whether there's an oxalate piece in that, I'm not sure. We have to, and it doesn't matter necessarily, except if you understand when oxalate deaccumulation is going on, there's things you can do to help yourself. It lowers the suffering. Taking calcium, calcium citrate, lemon juice, these things can make a tremendous difference in your symptoms. Getting enough potassium because your body's losing these minerals as it's inflamed, as it's dealing with this. You're losing potassium, you're losing magnesium. You need calcium as a critical support that can lower the stress. Remember, I was saying that calcium's so critical to cell function and the cells, especially the nerves, they start being like, "I can't sleep, and I can't," and that hyper you might get hiccups, you'll get bloating, you'll get problems with the bowel movements because the muscle coordination of peristalsis isn't gonna work well if the nerves are busy going, yeah, like you it can really cause lots of things you would not assume were nerve toxicity because this electrolyte disturbance and the inflammation. You also have the problem of if oxalic acid is coming out of your thyroid gland or your molars or your shoulder joint, going back into your bloodstream, it could be grabbing calcium all over again on its way out. And low calcium in the blood, sometimes it's a little asymptomatic, meaning you won't know, but sometimes you can get arrhythmias, high pulse, heart beating real hard, feeling like you're having a heart attack. You can have stroke like symptoms. It's quite dangerous to have the calcium level of the ionic calcium in the blood to drop. And if it's bad enough, the body will start pouring bone tissue back into your bloodstream to get the calcium back in there. The only place you're going to get the calcium replaced is from your bones, unless you take it as a supplement and control the acidity, which will continue. The body will also use calcium and bone minerals to lower the acidity of the inflammation that's going on during this time. So the whole process, it helps to know if it's oxalate related or not, because you definitely would want to be using the calcium and other supports to lower the stress on the system.
So would you recommend going, like, cold turkey, completely ripping the Band-Aid off and doing pretty much what I did, where I eliminated everything, or should people kinda wean off and titrate off of high oxalate foods?
I think gentle is better. Biology goes through cycles and change is good. So it's fine to make a change. But the more abrupt the change, the more you're asking for multiple adaptations. You're pulling fiber out. So you're changing your microbiome. That means a whole bunch of other bacteria aren't useful anymore and they die off. So you're going to get die off stress with changing over your microbiome just from changing the fiber content of your diet, which I like lower fiber diets. I think people do better on very low fiber. And that's sometimes I can help people get over constipation by just going low fiber. So there's all kinds of changes you're making when you change your diet around, including the oxalate piece. And with oxalates, if you do a nice abrupt change, some people, their bodies are just so needing to get rid of oxalate that's in the tissues. This takes that advantage of that moment and it can start this deaccumulation process quickly and dramatically. In some people, they'll go cold turkey into carnivore, which is no plants, and all the oxalates are in the plant foods. There's really nothing in the animal foods oxalate wise to worry about. So you're going from potentially pretty high oxalate diet down to nothing. And some people get away with that for 3 years before they get these symptoms, or even 6 years before. So some people, 3 days, usually get a 3-day honeymoon period. You guys felt great for a little while when you change your diet. You're usually going to notice that. But as early as 3 days, I'd say on average within 2 weeks, people who end up really with difficulty in this recovery from too much oxalate in your past, those people who come to my group meetings and things on Zoom, we meet with the group and we learn and talk, they tend to feel it within a couple weeks, most of them.
It's a little bit different for everyone. So,
Yep.
you mentioned, which is surprising, you mentioned the bowel movements and such. I noticed since removing it, I actually have better bowel movements now. I'm not constipated.
Yep.
And you also mentioned fiber as well. There's this misconception that fiber is what's going to help us with digestion. So
It
is there
can as
any
kind of a backroom workaround. It's like either high or low, but medium fiber sometimes gets you stuck in constipation.
mm,
And
okay.
I used to like roto-root myself with this is why I did a romaine lettuce salad for dinner every night, plus a couple other vegetables because I was so prone to constipation. People don't even believe that I would come home from a busy day at academia, a 9-hour plus day, and cook this giant meal and then take lunch with me the next day with soup and salad, have a salad at lunch and one at dinner because I needed to keep roto-rooting things through. But once I got down to like no fiber, everything works much better. It's not just you and I, it's most of my clients, it's a lot of us.
So why are we eating this stuff? How did this like come to fruition? I know it's a very broad question.
Oh, it's a really fun question. I love to like think about these, like why I love this kind of stuff because there's lots of elements to this. And one of the first ones that comes to mind is that I have this personal theory that one way we could justify the land takings and the huge investment from the money people to build a railroad all the way to California and to Florida and back, because most of the world was like from Virginia to Maine, from like Cleveland to Boston to DC, that a lot of humanity lived up there, right? But we needed to find out what's going on in California. We need to bring Florida orange juice back. And California is this kind of vegetable basket of North America. The climate allows them to grow all kinds of produce. So, and the US agencies' jobs are to make for a flourishing economy. So we want to make sure you have to have your fresh orange juice and your fresh lettuce and these things we justify from far-reaching places on North America to justify all this infrastructure. Like it's critical to economic development. And it kind of worked. We were an agricultural, like most everybody else, an agricultural country for a long time. So there's that. There's also the fact that you can you can grow vegetables at home and you can scratch out filler food that connects you between the hunts and the fishing and some are uneven. You can't always come up with a dinner when you go hunting and go fishing. Sometimes you come home empty-handed. And so they're very helpful to bridge that gap. And you can use herbs and spices to lower the bacterial count. They're kind of antibacterial. The chemicals in plants and herbs and spices are sidle enough that you can that's why a lot of the hot countries use a lot of spices because you didn't have a refrigerator, right? So you use herbs and hot spices to help the food be safer. And by the way, you get hooked on those flavors and those textures and those colors and the creativity that you get when you have more ingredients with more textures and colors and flavors. My goodness, it's so exciting. You can develop a whole culinary style and every world space has their different culinary style. A lot of that styling comes around adding in the plant foods. So it's fun. It adds variety and cultural entertainment. And food is such a critical piece of cultural bonding, like the development of production strategies, farming strategies, and harvesting strategies, and cooking and consuming strategies all are the basis of culture itself.
Where do you think things are heading now? Because I know like carnivores on this huge wave.
Yeah, so, ooh, do I get to be a futurist and have a crystal ball and dream about the future? I think that people are in crises enough with their health and their fertility, like, "Can I get pregnant? Is this pregnancy going well? Is my child healthy?" A lot of change comes from mothers worried about their children, and if they see their child is not thriving, many mothers will be on the hunt for an answer, and once they find that answer, they will stick with it. So we have, like, women against drunk driving who are defending their children from death from drink. Like, I think the women will continue to push for better answers as long as they really embrace this femininity of motherhood. And I'm not a mother myself, but I really value the feminine principle of nurturing, caring, and bringing us a healthy future. I mean, you're born with your ovaries, built in your mother's body. Those ovaries need to be protected as the jewels of humanity from these toxins. and be allowed to produce healthy generations for generations to come. There are influences in your grandmother's body that affected the ovary that became you. And so your well being depends on 3 generations of wisdom. And we've had 3 generations of trans fats, garbage food, and then trying to bring in this vegetarian thing as a mainstream option, and plants and nuts and things, making them more and more affordable as part of this economic development, where the diet has moved to a more toxic state and there's more suffering going on. And hopefully, we're hitting a bottom. We've had enough of autism. We've had enough of depression. We've had enough of anxiety and mental illness and arthritis and osteoporosis and we can see that humans could thrive and do better.
Absolutely. It's like we woke Mama Bear up, or someone did, but she's up, she's pissed off.
Yeah,
Don't mess
let's
with her
wake up
kids.
Mama Bear. The whole culture needs to come back to that feminine energy of nurturance, and that Mama Bear is a fierce creature.
Mhm.
The fierceness in the name of good. The fierceness in the name of defending the innocent and the undefended, the vulnerable.
Since we're on the topic of kids, I'm just gonna mention in there, like, my son, he loves meat, he loves raw dairy, he loves raw cheese. We have presented him with vegetables. He never wanted them, and I'm sure that is probably the case for many other parents out there where it's like you try to get your kids to eat their vegetables. Maybe you heard from grandma in the past, "You need to eat your veggies." Uh, they're not interested, and that's probably, in my opinion, a very intuitive thing, and we should probably listen to them a little bit more too. But
I
that's
love
just me.
that. No, I'm with you. I think honestly, kids still have their intuition. All food is learned. You are taught what's food, what isn't, how you eat it. It's a learned thing. You can learn to like anything. All cultures, I mean, they're eating stuff in Japan that most Americans wouldn't come near, right? You learn to like these things or not to like them with what you're exposed to. Even the flavors your mom eats is affecting your tendencies. So, but there is some strong instinctual abilities for a clean, healthy body to work with, and children can do that. They can be drawn to what works or doesn't work for them. I think it's really cool.
Mhm,
I think I was born oxalate toxic, so I loved my rhubarb. I love my vegetables. I ate all that stuff as a kid. I like those flavors, and man, I paid a price for that big time. Really early on, having a lot of strep throat as a kid. As kids are oxalate poison, they're fussy, they have rashes, they get diaper rashes, they literally get vulvodynia. They can have trouble with learning and focus and be moody, and difficult to work with, and that's because they're a little bit poisoned.
mhm. They're in pain.
They're in pain. That's 100%.
What you're mentioning with the social aspect of things, I was just reading recently, I don't know if you've heard of him, Owsley Stanley, he was nicknamed the Bear. He was a carnivore for 47 years, and he mentions how why we are used to these foods and why we can't really give them up is due to what he called acculturation. So it's literally just bred into us that we should eat these things. And he also said that this is due to the mothers. Not trying to put any blame here, but it's like the moms are going to teach their children what they should be nourishing with.
Mothers pervade culture. They do.
Yeah,
They they're the main teachers, and
Mama
women are
Bear.
teachers in schools. You go to kindergarten, and it's often a woman who's teaching kindergarten who's teaching what she is told is right. And culturally, in Western society, for the last 60 years or more, maybe even 100 years, women are very conscious about their figure and their weight. And so, if you starve yourself on just lettuce, you can keep yourself scrawny and have your waist. so, women will like force their husbands to start eating vegetables because they really believe they're healthy. And sometimes through marriage, we can, married men do better. We know that men do well with a woman there looking out for them, loving on them, taking care of them, giving them a purpose, somebody to look out for too. That's all good. But like, I kind of wrecked my husband's health insisting that he eat sweet potatoes, which he didn't like, and feeding him Swiss chard, which he had never had, and letting him like, "Yeah, honey, go ahead and snack on those almonds because, hey, you're 15 pounds overweight, so that's a good snack for you." Like, I gave him carpal tunnel syndrome.
Mm.
And then I accidentally fixed it when we went on the low oxalate diet because I'm, of course, the wife is always trying to cajole her guy into eating the way she thinks she ought to eat. And we accidentally fixed him in time when he missed his surgery. Thank God. He was on his way to surgery. The timing was super lucky and he didn't ever need the surgery. But at the time, he couldn't hold a dumbbell or a rake or an axe in the garden. He couldn't sleep well because it was really bothering his neck and shoulder and hand were bothering him so much. He'd wake up all the time and it'd make him anxious. And the diet, the high oxalate diet, was adding to his reactivity. He was having trouble with blood sugar control and reacting to other foods. Like he became allergic to eggs. Maybe the egg allergy came on partially because I was feeding him too much oxalate at the time. I don't know. Like there's potentially all these interactions, but basically he came to me a little chubby and he left like, carpal tunnel. And yeah, I wish anyone who has anxiety or prone to connective tissue pain, fibromyalgia, arthritis, tennis elbow, vision problems, tooth pain, kidney. These are all issues that respond badly to high oxalate diet and better when you get the oxalate out of the diet.
Something to consider, and that's like a broad range of symptoms too. But
Yeah.
at least you didn't give your husband antifreeze. You did not do that.
I didn't because it was all well intended, which is part of the tragedy of the story of oxalates is that we're doing this primarily out of the best intentions and we're choosing what we're told is healthy and ultimately it can undermine your health. And you don't want to be a victim of that kind of I mean, it sounds like a dark dystopian movie, that this evil character is lurking in this cute little outfit and everybody trusts it and it's busy infecting us with problems. Ugh.
I know you gotta run, Sally. I just wanna ask one more question if I can. I know there's more that I wanted to get to. Maybe if you're open to it, we can continue this another time as well. But
Maybe.
how has your dietary approach changed? What do you do now then?
Well, I'm not the greatest example of like getting to eat whatever I want because I have had such a lifetime of oxalate problems. I also come from a family with a lot of allergies. Both parents have allergies. All my siblings have allergies. We all have back problems. I have let oxalate exaggerate my back problems, and I have, completely innocently. I can't blame myself. And I don't want anyone who has made the mistake of eating a high oxalate diet to feel in any way guilty for having made this mistake. It is not your fault. But my immune system is not a happy place and I am reactive. You know how you didn't get along with the blueberries and we don't know why, whether it was the oxalates or something else where your system is reacting with unhappiness? Anytime you respond to something with unhappiness, swelling, pain, mood problems, difficult sleeping, indigestion, this is stress on the body. The body's saying, that's the immune system having to be in action when you don't want it to be. The quieter and the happier immune system, the better your life. Well, my immune system is like allergic to everything. If I walk on a treadmill, I get swollen knees from that.
Mm.
I'm allergic to the treadmill. My system is so like sensitive to little stressors. So I'm on a limited diet. I eat a lot of pork and fish. I love sardines and various other seafoods and coconut but it's pretty limited. I need carbs. I highly think that we have been using carbs on and off for a long time. You don't have to have them every day. You don't have to high carb every day, but you don't necessarily need to be keto all the time either. And so, what's important in my story, I just can't seem to get to the point today. What's important in my story is that you need to listen to your body and customize your diet. If you're not doing well, if you're not sleeping well and feeling happy and feeling productive and generally free of pain, mostly, then there's some things you can improve. So let go of whatever dogma might be getting in between you listening to your body. So come back to having a good listening and conversation with yourself. And you know how to have a better way to hear your body and what it wants to tell you? A low oxalate diet. You get the toxin out of the way that quits having all this interference. It's like radio static. You get rid of that radio static and you'll be able to start to hear, just like the blueberries wasn't a great experience for you. You'll be able to detect, and I was able to do this myself and realize, ooh, actually lettuce doesn't agree with me. Neither does cabbage. Like, oh, I mean that lovely sauerkraut that I make, I can't have it. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And then the next step to listening is be the servant to your body. You're here to help your body help you live a great life. And so you need a little discipline and respect for what your body's telling you and just be that humble servant and take care of yourself.
Pick up the call. The body's trying to deliver a message, but yeah, you have all that static, yellow noise, and removing whatever's causing the problem, maybe going on like an elimination diet
Mhm.
will
So the carnivore
allow
diet is a
message.
great elimination diet, right?
Mhm.
Yep.
Right. Well, Sally, I have loved this. Again, if you're open to it, I would love to continue this in the future because I had a lot more to go into. But how can people find you and what are you working on at the moment?
Well, I have a recipe collection of like 180 recipes on my website. We're working on making that print on demand, so it'll be just like the data companion in a spiral bound at the same size as a companion to the companion, so you can get the cookbook in print. Working on that and some other things. We still have group classes. Eventually, there'll be an online video course to take. But if you want to study oxalates and get my take on it, there's only a few things you need. You need my website, which is sallyknorton.com. There's a lot of free material there. That's the only place you can get the data companion that helps tell you what oxalates are in foods and color codes it so you can do a quick glance through and learn some stuff really fast and then use this to kind of control the oxalates. You don't have to go zero. It's not about zeroing out. It's just about coming down out of that toxic range of exposure down to something you can handle. This is the only thing you'll find from me on Amazon is this book. So anything else that's on Amazon, it's not me. It's the world of scammy stuff. So it's simple. And my YouTube channel, if you're interested in little shorts that help spread the message or stories that explain how this affects people differently, you'll get those testimonials there. And there's one coming out soon about affecting pregnancy, childbirth, and breastfeeding. There's a recent one that came out about osteoporosis and how that oxalates are connected to loss of calcium and bone health. That's clearer. And this poor gentleman's osteoporosis that started at age 38 landed him 10 years later in the hospital with quadriplegia.
Hmm.
So his neck crushed because of the weak bones with a biking accident that probably wouldn't have hurt him if he in that kind of certainly would not have caused 5 vertebrae to crush. So that that sounds awful, and it is, because it can get that extreme, and so check out the YouTube channel and my, website, and come join us in a liberation. You don't have to force spinach and chard down your kid's throat. You don't have to have those arguments anymore. You can feel more relaxed about how many servings of vegetables you get. And please feel comfortable eating animal foods.
Yep. I consider salads rabbit food, honestly, and I don't think I'm a rabbit. So,
You're not.
love it, Sally. Again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for sharing your message and that labor of love that the data companion book looks like. I think that's going to be very helpful for everyone. And yeah, thank you for being you. Thank you for sharing.
James, it's nice to be with you. Thanks. Appreciate it.